Chapter 1: The Spark in the Dark. It didn't start with a grand vision or a venture capitalist pitch deck. It started with a power cut. Lagos was breathing its hot, heavy breath that night, the kind of air that feels like a damp blanket. I was in my tiny, one-room apartment in Ikeja, the glow of my second-hand laptop screen the only island of light in a sea of darkness. The persistent hum of a neighbor's generator was my soundtrack, a gritty, petrofumed lullaby that every Nigerian professional knows too well. On my screen, lines of code were failing. I was fine-tuning a natural language model for a client in Berlin, a simple contract job that paid my rent. The task was to make the AI understand nuanced customer service queries in German. But my training run, which had been chugging along for hours, had just crashed. Not because of a bug in my code, but because the unstable power had flickered just enough for my laptop to switch to battery, and the surge, or the drop, had corrupted the entire process. Not again, I whispered to the silent room, the frustration a sharp, physical pain behind my eyes. I leaned back, the plastic chair groaning in protest, and stared out the window at the sporadic lights of the city. Each light was a story, a business, a dream, all held together by a fragile, often failing, grid. My name is Ton Adebayo. I was a 28-year-old AI engineer with a master's from a good university in the UK, and I felt utterly, completely powerless. I had the skills to build intelligent systems that could parse human language, recognize cancer in medical scans more accurately than seasoned radiologists, and predict market trends, but I couldn't guarantee a stable 5-hour stretch of electricity. The irony was a bitter pill. I thought about my colleagues from university, scattered across Silicon Valley, Zurich, and Singapore. They were working on massive GPU clusters, with teraflops of computing power at their fingertips, their biggest worry being which flavor of artisanal coffee to get from the micro-roaster downstairs. Their models trained in minutes or hours. Mine took days, and were always one NEPA bill away from total collapse. NEPA, the National Electric Power Authority, though we all sarcastically said it stood for Never Expect Power Always. In that moment of darkness, a different kind of spark ignited. It wasn't the flash of genius, but a slow, burning ember of defiance. Why does it have to be this way? Why does innovation have to be a privilege of stable infrastructure? Why can't we build something here, not in spite of the challenges, but because of them? The problem wasn't a lack of talent. Nigeria, and Africa as a whole, was teeming with brilliant, hungry minds. I saw them at local tech hubs, at hackathons, writing incredible code on smartphones because they couldn't afford laptops. The problem was infrastructure. Access to the raw, computational horsepower needed to train modern AI was a luxury few on the continent could afford. Cloud computing credits were expensive, and reliable, high-speed internet to access them was even more so. The ember grew into a question, and the question into a mission. What if I could build a local, powerful, and, most importantly, resilient AI compute infrastructure right here in Lagos? Not just for me, but for every developer, every researcher, every startup that was being held back by the same constraints. I opened a new document. The cursor blinked mockingly in the dark. I typed a single line, a title for a plan that felt more like a fantasy. Project TB, a distributed AI grid for Africa. I named it after the Greek titan of light and sight. It felt fitting. We were going to bring a little light into the darkness. Chapter 2: The Blueprint on a Napkin. The next morning, powered by cheap instant coffee and a stubborn resolve, I went to see my oldest friend, Chike. Chike was my opposite. Where I was quiet and contemplative, he was a force of nature, loud, charismatic, with a laugh that could fill a stadium. He was also the most brilliant hardware engineer I knew. While I lived in the abstract world of software, he lived in the tangible, gritty world of circuits, solder, and cooling systems. He ran a small but successful business repairing and refurbishing high-end electronics, from gaming PCs to servers salvaged from bankrupt companies. I found him in his workshop, a chaotic symphony of disassembled machinery, the air thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. He was hunched over a motherboard, a soldering iron in his hand like a surgeon's scalpel. Turned. My software wizard. To what do I owe the honor? He boomed, not looking up from his work. Come to finally learn a real skill. I need your help, Chike, I said, my voice more serious than I intended. He finally looked up, sensing my tone. He put the iron down. Talk to me. I laid it out. The failed training run, the frustration, the late-night revelation. I told him about Project TB. His initial smirk faded, replaced by a focused intensity one knew well. He listened, wiping his hands on an already stained rag. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, staring at a stack of gutted server cases in the corner. So, he said slowly, you want to build a supercomputer? In Lagos. With our power grid. You finally lost it, my friend. I'm not talking about a single, monolithic supercomputer, I countered, pulling out the notebook where I'd scribbled my thoughts. That's the old way. That's what they have in the West. We can't compete with that, and we don't need to. I'm talking about a distributed grid. A network of smaller, powerful computing nodes, spread out. We link them together with high-speed, low-latency connections. If one node goes down because of power or internet, the others pick up the slack. Chike's eyes narrowed. He was starting to see it. A distributed system, like a blockchain, but for compute power. Exactly. But instead of a currency, we're mining intelligence. We build the nodes to be as self-sufficient as possible. Solar power, battery backups, satellite internet as a fallback. We make them resilient. He walked over to his workbench, grabbed a relatively clean napkin from next to a half-eaten plate of suya, and pulled out a pen. Okay, wizard. Draw it for me. And so, on that grease-stained napkin, the blueprint for the biggest AI setup in Africa was born. I drew circles for the nodes. Chike started scribbling hardware specs next to them. Each node needs multiple high-end GPUs, he muttered. We're not playing games here. We need NVIDIA A100S, or even H100S if we can get them. The cost, it's astronomical. We don't buy them new, I said, the plan crystallizing. That's where you come in. You find them. You salvage, you refurbish. You get creative. We can't afford to be purist. He nodded, a glint in his eye. I know a guy in Rotterdam who gets decommissioned servers from a big bank. The GPUs are a few generations old, but they are still powerful. We can get them for a fraction of the price. He scribbled Rotterdam contact on the napkin. And the housing? I asked. Shipping containers, Chike said without hesitation. We modify them. Insulate them, feed them with custom cooling. They are rugged, mobile, and secure. We can place them anywhere, on a rooftop, in a compound, anywhere we can get a decent internet backbone and some sun. The napkin was now a dense web of diagrams, part numbers, and cost estimates. It was insane. The numbers Chike was jotting down were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that was just for a single node. We had no money. I had my savings from freelance work, about $10,000. Chike could maybe contribute another $15,000 in equipment and sweat equity. We were a drop in the ocean. But the idea was no longer just a spark. It was a fire, and it was spreading. We had a plan. A ridiculous, improbable, potentially glorious plan. Chapter 3, The First Node, The Beast in a Box. The next 6 months were a blur of manic energy and constant setbacks. We called our venture Adeptly.ai, a name that felt both aspirational and a little cheeky. Our first task was to build a proof of concept, a single node that could demonstrate the viability of our distributed grid. We called it Node Alpha. It had to be powerful, but more importantly, it had to be robust. Chike's workshop became our headquarters. The Rotterdam contact yielded our first major score, a batch of 16 NVIDIA V100 datacenter GPUs. They weren't the latest and greatest, but they were a generation ahead of anything commercially available in Nigeria. They arrived in a large, unmarked crate, and unboxing them felt like a religious experience. These were our seats. The heart of Node Alpha was a refurbished server rack Chike had sourced from a telecom company that was upgrading. The brain was a custom-built server motherboard. The lungs were the most critical part, the cooling system. Lagos's ambient heat was a formidable enemy for any computer. Standard air conditioning was too power-hungry. Chike, in a stroke of genius, designed a hybrid liquid cooling system using repurposed car radiators and high static pressure fans, all controlled by a Raspberry Pi that monitored temperatures and adjusted flow rates. It was janky, it was beautiful, and it worked. The body was a 20-foot shipping container, painted a stark white to reflect the sun. We welded on brackets for solar panels, cut vents for the cooling system, and lined the inside with sound dampening foam and insulation. We installed a bank of lithium-ion batteries, salvaged from electric car write-offs, and a powerful inverter. Funding this was a nightmare. My $10,000 was gone in a week. Chike poured his business's profits into it. We maxed out credit cards. We pitched to a few local angel investors, but their eyes glazed over when we started talking about petaflops and transformer models. AI. Like a robot, one of them asked. We need practical solutions, like a better ride-hailing app. We were on the verge of collapse when we got our first break. I was presenting at a small tech meetup, demonstrating a simple image recognition model running on a prototype of our node. I talked about the potential for agriculture, using AI to analyze satellite images to predict crop yields and detect pest outbreaks early. After the talk, a quiet, older man approached me. His name was Mr. Bello, and he owned one of the largest cassava farms in the country. Your machine, he said, his voice calm and measured. Can it really tell me which parts of my farm are sick before my foreman can see it? If we train it with the right data, yes, absolutely, I replied, my heart pounding. I lose 20% of my crop every year to disease, he said. I will pay you $50,000 to build a model for me. But you have to host it on your machine. I don't trust these foreign cloud companies with my data. It was our first client. It wasn't an investment in our infrastructure, but it was a vote of confidence and the capital we desperately needed to finish Node Alpha. We took the job immediately. The day we powered up Node Alpha for the first time was one of the most nerve-wracking of my life. Chike and I stood in the sweltering heat of his backyard, where the container was temporarily stationed. The solar panels were glistening on top. We had a diesel generator on standby, but we wanted to do this on solar power alone. Battery at 100%. Solar input is strong, Chike said, his finger hovering over the main power switch. Ready. Do it, I whispered. He flipped the switch. There was a deep hum as the inverter kicked in. The server rack inside the container whirred to life, a chorus of spinning fans. Lights on the GPUs blinked green. The cooling system pumps began their steady thrum. My laptop, connected via a hardline, showed the system booting up. The login prompt appeared. A cheer erupted from both of us, loud enough to startle the chickens in the neighbor's yard. It was working. We had built a self-contained, powerful AI compute node, powered by the sun, in the middle of Lagos. We spent the next 2 months working day and night on Mr. Bello's model. We drove across his vast farm, collecting thousands of images of healthy and diseased cassava plants. We fed this data into our models, training them on Node Alpha. The hum of the container became the sound of progress. We successfully delivered the model, which he integrated into his drones. The following season, his crop loss dropped to less than 5%. The word started to spread. We had a working prototype and a success story. Chapter 4, The Hive Mind, Assembling the Tribe. Success, at this stage, was a fragile thing. We had one node and one client. To build a true grid, we needed more nodes, more clients, and, most critically, more brains. I knew we couldn't do this alone. The vision was too big. We needed a team. The first person I thought of was Amina. I met Amina Jallo at a Pan-African Tech Conference in Accra a few years prior. A Sierra Leonean data scientist with a PhD from MIT, she was a force of intellect and passion. She was working on using AI for public health, modeling the spread of infectious diseases like malaria. We'd kept in touch, and I knew she was frustrated with the limitations of accessing compute power from Boston. I sent her a long, rambling email late one night, attaching the now famous photo of the napkin blueprint and a video of Node Alpha humming away. I ended it with, "The talent is here. The problems are here. Shouldn't the solutions be built here too?" She called me within an hour. "Turned, this is it," she said, her voice crackling with excitement over the unstable connection. "This is what we've been talking about. I'm in. I'll handle the data pipelines and the ML ops. Just tell me when." Amina's arrival was a game changer. She brought a rigorous, academic discipline to our chaotic startup energy. She designed a software architecture that would allow our distributed nodes to work in concert, a Kubernetes cluster for orchestrating containerized AI workloads, a federated learning framework that allowed models to be trained across the grid without centralizing sensitive data. She was the architect of our hive mind. Our next recruit was David. David Okonkwo was a young, self-taught prodigy I'd met at a hackathon. He was only 21, but he could write code that made my head spin. He had a particular talent for optimization, squeezing every last drop of performance out of limited hardware. He was our efficiency expert, the one who would ensure our models trained faster and used less power, a critical skill given our constraints. With Amina handling the core software and David optimizing everything, Chai could focus on what he did best, scaling the hardware. Our success with Mr. Bello had attracted a few more agricultural clients. We used the revenue to start building Node Beta. This one was more ambitious, located on the rooftop of a new tech hub in Yoba, Lagos's budding Silicon Lagoon. It was connected to a fiber optic line and had a more robust solar and battery setup. But we were still operating hand to mouth. We needed serious funding to build out the grid. That's when we met Femi. Femi Adeyemi was a legend in Nigerian tech circles. A venture capitalist who had made his fortune in mobile payments, he was now looking for moonshot projects. He'd heard rumors of the guys training AI in a shipping container. He invited us to his office in Victoria Island, a sleek, air-conditioned space that felt a million miles from Chai's workshop. We pitched him for an hour. Chai talked hardware, I talked vision, Amina talked tech architecture, and David, shyly, demoed a model he'd optimized to run 40% faster on our hardware. Femi listened intently, asking sharp, pointed questions. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You have a client. You have a working prototype. You have a brilliant team. And you have a vision that, if it works, could change the continent," he said. "But you're thinking too small." We were stunned. "Too small? You're talking about a grid in Nigeria. I'm talking about a grid for Africa. Nairobi. Accra. Kigali. Cape Town. You need to be everywhere. The problems you're solving for agriculture in Nigeria are the same in Kenya. The public health models Amina wants to build are needed across West Africa." He stood up and walked to his window, looking out over the Lagos skyline. "I will lead a seed round. $2 million. But I want a plan to launch 3 more nodes outside Nigeria within 18 months. It was more money than we had ever dreamed of. It was also a terrifying level of responsibility. We had just been given the keys to the kingdom, and the kingdom was an entire continent. Chapter 5, Scaling the Sun, Nodes Across the Continent. The 2 years that followed were a whirlwind of hypergrowth, a constant cycle of problem-solving on a continental scale. The VC money was a rocket fuel, but it came with intense pressure and scrutiny. Our first international node was in Nairobi, Kenya. The Silicon Savannah was a natural fit, with a vibrant tech ecosystem and a slightly more reliable power grid. But we faced new challenges. Importing our containerized node through Mombasa port was a bureaucratic nightmare that took 3 months and a small mountain of paperwork. We learned the hard way that local partner doesn't just mean a business partner, but someone who understands the intricate, often informal, systems that make things work. Our node in Kigali, Rwanda, was easier, thanks to the country's famously efficient governance. We placed it at a partnership with a local university, providing compute power to their students and researchers in exchange for land and a secure location. This became our model for expansion: find a strategic anchor tenant, a university, a research institute, a large corporation that could provide a base and an immediate user for the grid. Accra, Ghana followed, then Cape Town, South Africa. Each node was an iteration on the last. Chike and his growing hardware team constantly improved the designs. We moved to more efficient solar panels, better batteries, and even experimented with small-scale wind turbines in windy coastal areas. Our cooling systems evolved from liquid cooling to, in some cases, immersion cooling, where the server boards are submerged in a non-conductive fluid, a technology that was incredibly efficient in hot climates. But hardware was only half the battle. Amina's software, HiveMind, was the true magic. She built a web platform where a user, a startup in Lagos, a researcher in Nairobi, could submit their AI training job. The platform would then intelligently distribute the workload across the entire grid. If a node in Accra was underutilized, it would pick up a task from an overloaded node in Lagos. If a node lost internet connectivity, the job would fail over seamlessly to another location. It was a resilient, self-healing network, a direct answer to the infrastructural fragility we had set out to conquer. We weren't just providing raw compute power, we were building an ecosystem. We launched an AI incubator program, offering grants of compute time to promising African startups. We saw an explosion of innovation. A team in Nairobi built a model that could diagnose malaria from a photo of a blood smear with 99% accuracy, making advanced diagnostics available in remote clinics. A group in Accra created a natural language processing model for Twi and Yoruba, preserving and digitizing local languages that global tech giants ignored. A South African startup used our grid to optimize logistics for minibus taxis, the chaotic but vital lifeblood of African cities. We were no longer just a tech company, we were a catalyst. The Adeptly.ai grid was becoming a utility, a foundational layer for the next generation of African innovation. But with growth came new, more complex problems. Chapter 6: The Storm, when the grid flickered. Our first major crisis hit during the rainy season. A massive storm swept through Lagos, causing widespread flooding and power outages. Our primary node, Node Alpha, now housed in a proper data center facility, we'd graduated from Chike's backyard, was on backup power. But the flooding knocked out the fiber optic line connecting it to the internet. At the same time, a scheduled maintenance was happening on our satellite backup link. For a critical 8-hour window, Node Alpha was on island, cut off from the HiveMind. This coincided with a massive training job from our biggest client yet, a Pan-African financial institution that was using our grid to build a fraud detection model for all of its digital transactions across 15 countries. The dataset was enormous, petabyte scale, and the training job was split across multiple nodes. When Node Alpha went silent, the failover should have been seamless. But a bug in Amina's orchestration software, one that had never been triggered before, caused a cascade failure. The workload that was supposed to be redistributed from Lagos got stuck in a queue. Nodes in Nairobi and Accra, expecting data and instructions from Lagos, started to time out. The entire grid began to slow down, like a heart struggling to beat. I was woken up at 3 a.m. by a frantic call from the CTO of the bank. Our model training has halted, turned. Our entire digital banking platform is relying on this going live next month. What is happening? Panic is a cold fist. I opened my laptop, my hands shaking. The grid monitoring dashboard was a sea of red and yellow warning lights. Amina was already on a video call with David, their faces grim on my screen. "It's the orchestrator," Amina said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "There's a race condition when a primary node fails during a multi-petabyte data sync. We never tested for this specific scenario. We are losing compute cycles every minute," David added. "We need to manually reassign the workloads, but the queue is jammed." For 72 hours, we didn't sleep. We lived on coffee and jollof rice ordered in. Chek was on the ground in Lagos, trying to get a temporary satellite link established, battling the flooded roads. Amina and David were deep in the code, trying to fix the bug and patch the orchestrator. I was the communicator, managing the client, our team, and our investors, putting on a calm face while internally I was terrified that our entire house of cards was about to collapse. This was the moment of truth. Our entire philosophy was resilience through distribution. And it had failed. On the third day, as the floodwaters receded, Amina shouted, "I got it." She had found the root of the bug and deployed a patch. Slowly, agonizingly, the grid began to heal. The red lights on the dashboard turned to yellow, then to green. The workloads reassigned, and the training job resumed. We had weathered the storm. But it was a brutal lesson in humility. Our technology was complex, and the environments we operated in were unpredictable. We couldn't just build it and forget it, we had to be constantly vigilant, constantly improving. We instituted a new rule: chaos engineering. We would regularly, and in a controlled manner, simulate failures, pulling plugs, cutting internet lines, to constantly test and strengthen the resilience of our hive mind. The crisis, while painful, ultimately made us stronger. It proved that even when parts of the grid failed, the whole could survive and recover. Our client, impressed with our transparency and frantic efforts throughout the crisis, signed an even larger, long-term contract. Chapter 7: The Crown Jewel, Project Baobab. By our 5th year, the Adeptly.ai grid had 12 nodes across 8 African countries. We were profitable, respected, and had fundamentally altered the AI landscape on the continent. But we were still, in the global scheme of things, a niche player. Our grid was a patchwork of refurbished and new hardware, powerful but not cutting edge. To truly lead, we needed to build something that would silence any remaining doubters. We called it Project Baobab, named after the ancient, majestic tree that is a symbol of life and community across Africa. The goal was audacious: to build the single most powerful AI supercomputer on the continent, entirely powered by renewable energy. It would be our crown jewel, a central hub that would anchor the entire distributed grid. It wouldn't replace our distributed model but would complement it, handling the most massive, computationally intensive jobs that required a single, massive pool of resources. The scale was unlike anything we had attempted. We secured a tract of land in a semi-arid region of Namibia, chosen for its constant, blazing sun and ample space. The facility would be a vast array of shipping containers, housing thousands of the latest NVIDIA H100 GPUs, all cooled by a passive cooling system that used the dry desert air, and powered by a 50-megawatt solar farm. The cost was over $50 million. To fund it, we had to go for a Series B funding round. This meant pitching to global VCs, the kings of Silicon Valley. Femi, Amina, and I flew to San Francisco. The experience was surreal. We were pitching our vision of a sun-powered African supercomputer to people in boardrooms that felt like they were floating above the clouds. The questions were different. Your gross margins are lower than we typically see in deep tech, one investor noted. The political risk in your operating regions is a concern, said another. Why not just build this in Arizona? The subsidies are better, and the infrastructure is already there. I looked at them, these masters of the universe, and I realized the fundamental gap in understanding. This isn't just about compute power, I said, my voice steady. It's about sovereignty. It's about agency. We are not building this in Arizona because the problems we are solving are here, in Africa. The data that will train these models is African. The talent that will use this machine is African. We are not just building a supercomputer, we are building a cathedral of knowledge for the next century, and it must be built on African soil. We left San Francisco with polite, "will pass" and "keep us in the loop." It was disheartening. But Femi, ever the strategist, had a backup plan. He had been simultaneously pitching to sovereign wealth funds and Pan-African development banks. They understood the vision immediately. The potential for agriculture, for climate change modeling, for pharmaceutical research, for securing Africa's digital future, it resonated deeply. We secured the funding from a consortium led by the African Development Bank. It was a landmark deal, the largest single investment in African tech infrastructure. Building Baobab took 2 grueling years. It was a monumental logistical feat, coordinating the shipment of thousands of components, managing construction in a remote location, and building a team of engineers to run it. Czech moved to Namibia for most of it, becoming a suntanned, desert-hardened version of his former self. The launch day for Project Baobab was a continental event. Presidents, tech leaders, and media from across Africa and the world were present. As I stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces in front of the vast, silent array of white containers, my mind flashed back to that dark apartment in Lagos, to the flickering laptop screen. 8 years ago, I began, my voice echoing slightly. This all started with a power cut. It started with a feeling of powerlessness. Today, we are flipping the switch on a different kind of power. This facility, connected to our grid of 12 other nodes across Africa, represents a new dawn. It is proof that the future of technology will not be built in one place alone. It will be built by all of us, for all of us. I nodded to Chaik, who was standing by the main power console. He gave me a wide grin and threw the massive lever. A deep, resonant hum emerged from the facility, the sound of thousands of GPUs waking up, the sound of the sun being converted into intelligence. The monitoring screens behind me lit up, showing the incredible computational power now coming online. The crowd erupted in applause. We had done it. We had built the biggest AI setup in Africa. Chapter 8, The Horizon, More Than Machines. Today, Adeptly.ai is more than a company. It's a platform. The grid, anchored by the Baobab facility, is the bedrock of African AI. But the real story was never about the hardware. It was always about the people. David, our young optimization prodigy, now runs our open-source division, which has released state-of-the-art AI models pre-trained on African languages and datasets, models that are used by millions. Amina leads our AI for Good Foundation, which uses dedicated cycles on the grid for non-profit projects, predicting famines, modeling the impact of climate change on coastal cities, and discovering new drugs for neglected tropical diseases. Czech is our chief visionary officer for hardware, constantly scouting the next frontier, whether it's quantum computing or neuromorphic chips, and how we can adapt it for our unique context. And me. I'm still the conductor of this incredible orchestra. My job is to keep looking at the horizon. The next challenge isn't just about building bigger machines. It's about the ethical questions. How do we ensure the data we use doesn't perpetuate biases? How do we make sure the benefits of this powerful AI are distributed equitably? How do we prevent a new, digital divide from opening up? We've started the African AI Council, a body of ethicists, policymakers, and community leaders who help us draft guidelines and governance for the technology we are building. We are determined to get this right. Sometimes, late at night, I log into the grid monitoring dashboard. I watch the pulses of light representing data packets traveling between Lagos and Nairobi, between Kigali and Baobab. I see the compute utilization graph spike as a researcher in Accra trains a new model, or a startup in Cape Town runs a complex simulation. Each pulse of light, each spike on the graph, is a story. It's a farmer saving his crop, a doctor making a better diagnosis, a student discovering something new, a language being preserved for posterity. The spark in the dark didn't just light up a server rack, it lit up a continent of possibilities. And this is only the beginning.